Just a Jewel with our host, Arthur Malik.
Welcome to Just a Jewel. I'm your host, Arthur Malik. Today we're just going to have a conversation. I'm going to make it a little different today. We're just going to have a conversation, and I want to touch on the barriers between the youth and adults of today. And today I have with me an intriguing young fella by the name of Malachi Davis. Malachi, tell us a little something about yourself.
Well, my name is Malachi. I'm 25 years old. I just recently had a daughter, so I'm a new father. I was once top 20 in the country in basketball, so I have an extensive basketball career, college, high school, even starting from 12 years old, middle school. I work for a foundation called the Cannon Foundation where we rehome wild horses. And, a lot of people say that's a culture shock for somebody like me coming from the city. But I'm involved in a lot of things and around the community, and I have my own AAU team. So
I want to get straight into it. I want to ask, because they say from the age of 25 to 30 in the inner cities, we either should be dead or we should have felony convictions.
right,
Do you have a felony conviction?
I don't.
What prevented you from following that particular path?
I would have to say two things. Having a strong single mother who guided me in the right direction and always let me know what's important and taught me morals, and she kind of led by example. A lot of people, they say one thing, but you see other things. And my mother being a teacher, she always made sure education was first. And I also believe basketball helped a lot. A lot of the time, I didn't have the time to be in the street with my friends and some of the people that I hung around. So I was either away at a tournament or I was at a game or I was at practice. So I really didn't have the time to be with my peers that were in the street, that was doing certain things that would have led me to probably have a felony conviction or, be in the street or locked up or dead by the age of 25.
But even when you return back from your basketball games or whatever, they still, I'm pretty sure, the guys that were doing contrary to you, they
Right.
still whispered to you like,
Absolutely.
yo, come on. What prevented you from answering that whisper?
I think there's a few things. I think for one, the fear that my mother instilled in me, not so much the fear, but the respect and reverence and regard I had for her made me feel like I can't disappoint her. I can't fail. I can't fall into this trap. I also grew up in a household where a lot of the men were incarcerated. So I had an uncle who is actually serving life now. And I had cousins and, just different people in my direct circle and immediate family that were in that lifestyle. And I think that the example that they set was something that I never wanted to do. Knowing what it was like to lose your freedom, seeing my mother and my grandparents crying and seeing those type of things led me to feel like I don't ever want to be the reason for my mother's tears. I don't ever want to, feel like I failed my family. So
I want to coin in on a word you just used. You used the word called respect.
Right.
You just mentioned respect. And I want to ask you, what do you think is the barrier between the youth of today
right.
and the adults of today? Do you think is a lack of respect?
Absolutely. I think it's funny that you say that because a lot of the time when I'm talking to, the elderly or, people that are older than me, they always are so shocked. Like, wow, you're so polite or you're so respectful. And I've realized that is something that comes far in between. It's like, it shouldn't be. That should be something that's regular and expected from the youth. But we live in a time where there's so much going on where you look on the news and you see young kids punching 80-year-old women, taking their pocketbook,
Right.
disrespecting the elderly. And it's sad, but I think the disconnect comes from the fact that a lot of people aren't raising their children. I think that there's a lot of parents that are having their kids young and they're not really in their life. I know a lot of kids myself that's my age that have children and it's the grandmother watching them or it's somebody older who's not really able to watch the kid and really instill certain morals and values in them. And in doing so, they're able to go to the street. They're able to do this because it's like, all right, my mother's not here. My grandmother's too old to be watching me. So now I have that opportunity to get out and kind of get into certain
But
things.
what about the father being subtracted from the household? Because you just mentioned also that my mother, a single parent, being a single parent, and she still instilled you in that terminology, respect.
Right.
So do you think the subtraction of the father plays a major part in this
Absolutely.
disrespect?
I think that in certain instances, no, but that's very rare. Like for me, it only took my mom. And of course, there's a village. You know, I had uncles, I had
So you still had that balance of a male figure in your life?
to a certain extent. Okay. Not so much in my life all the time and guided me, but I did have positive, for example, my grandfather. My grandfather worked for Chase. My grandfather had a great, high salary job, and he instilled certain principles in me. So even though he wasn't always in my life the way my mother was or always around me, I still had that as an example. And I do think that the lack of fathers, especially in the Black poor community, is a huge thing. And I think to a certain extent it's by design. And I think that when you don't have a male there to, regulate a male child, it's hard for a mother to do that. No matter how strict or stern a mother is, she'll never be a man. It's a huge difference when your father pulls you to the side and disciplines you than when your mother does.
So do you do believe in the philosophy when people say that a woman cannot raise a man?
100%.
Okay.
I think it takes some type of male influence. I don't think my mother could have did it if it was just her. I think it took my grandfather,
so you would have had some type of imbalance?
Absolutely.
Okay. What type of imbalance do you think that you would have had? Do you think that you would have succumbed now to the streets?
I believe so. I think it was so prevalent in my community, and I was around so many of my peers that were going down that path that it would have been inevitable. They say that you are the company you keep. And the majority of the company I kept was going down that path. It was very rare that I had friends doing positive things. And like I said, basketball allowed me to get away a lot. So I wasn't, indulging in those things. But if I was home, if I didn't have, those male figures to show me what not to do and what to do, yeah, I think it would have been very easy for that.
What are some of the components you think, as a young man, as the youth, that will bridge this particular gap that we are speaking of between the youth and the adults of today?
I think that more conversations need to happen, like what we're doing right now. I think that conversing and hashing out your differences and talking and understanding, I think, understanding is very important in this equation. I think a lot of people notice problems, but they don't offer solutions. And I think that a lot of elderly, it's just, we can't connect with them, and they give up. It's not, how can we fix this problem? Because although it is young people doing things that are disrespectful to the elderly are also not helping. They're not reaching back. They're not trying to help the situation. They're just pointing a finger and condemning us, when it's like little simple conversations like this and dialogues help. If I can understand you, I can respect you. You know what I mean? It's like being from a different race. If I have no knowledge of your culture, if I know nothing about you, it might be easy for me to disrespect you because I can't relate to you. But once we sit down and have a conversation and I'm able to see, we're not as different as I may think, then we can talk.
Me being an adult and you being in opposition of the youth, oftentimes than not, when I converse with adults, they place blame on the youth.
Right.
But then I always come back with a rebuttal as, who taught them?
Right.
See, who taught the youth?
100%.
It's normally the adults.
Yeah.
You see? So I think the blaming should discontinue, and we should try, as you said, we should try to understand the infliction that we place upon each other.
I agree. Because I don't think anybody's free of blame. Yes, a lot of the time the stuff you see on the news is, a young kid punching an elderly person and stuff like that. So the negative effects are more visual with the younger people. But as far as the blame, it goes for both of us.
And I concur, because I've seen on Facebook just the other day, I've seen a female with her little, maybe 4-year-old son. And he had a blunt, a marijuana blunt in his hand. You see? So now, if you're teaching him, either subconsciously or not, you're still teaching him how to be disrespectful.
100%.
So I think it's important that we have to raise our children from a better perspective, whether the male is not there or not. You see, because you had a balance, and that's very important. As you said, you had male figures.
Absolutely.
And some is missing. Some are missing, and these females are doing the best that they can do with the best that they have.
Yeah.
See? So it's hard to pinpoint one isolated or incident when it comes to bridging that particular gap. But I know that that gap can be bridged if we work together.
I agree. And I think that another issue in our community is the fact that there's a lot of generational scars that aren't acknowledged. And I think that a lot of the time, you know, in the black community especially, you know, people don't really acknowledge what we've gone through. And I think that in other cultures, it's not the same. You know, I've never heard anyone say to a Holocaust survivor, you should get over that. You know, that was years ago. You know, yeah, it's sad what happened, but you need to get over that. I've never heard anyone tell a family member of someone who passed in 9/11, yo, that was years ago. You need to get over that. But I do hear people say, you know, slavery happened over 100 years ago. You got to move on. And I think that in our communities, there's a self-hatred that was passed down generationally. And a lot of people don't realize that trauma can be passed down genetically. That's a scientific fact. And, you know, if we come from a culture where we were beaten, where we were fighting each other, you know, for the slave master and Mandingo warriors, that's a taught hatred that not only do we have self-hatred, we hate each other. So a lot of the crime, a lot of the murders, you know, it's always, look what they're doing. They don't know how to act, but there's never an acknowledgement of what led to us being like this. And, you know, Marcus Garvey has a saying where he would say that, you know, a nation with no knowledge of their past history is like a tree without roots. And we don't know where we come from. You know, that's the one thing. We were taken from our land. We were stole. You know, we don't have nothing to look back to like most cultures, you know, where it's like, all right, even if we went through some type of trauma, at least we know where we come from. We know our ancestry. We really don't have knowledge of that. And I think that's another thing that not just for the youth or for the elderly, but for everybody, we need to address as well.
I agree with that because if you think about it, black people are the only ethnicity to ever be enslaved on American soil. Right. No other ethnicity have ever been enslaved on American soil except black people. And however, I choose not to lean on a crutch too long. Because if you lean on a crutch too long, even when you drop it, you'll remain crippled. Right. So although these things transpired, although everyone else had Jordans and we had on slippery shoes to run the race, right? We still must understand that it's important to never give up that race.
Absolutely.
Right? We have to understand that we have to communicate, we have to build each other, because when we are in disconnect with each other, how do everyone else view you? You see? So it's important that we articulate that and we pass, or we disseminate that information towards one each other instead of laughing and ridiculing and belittling each other.
100%.
So, and it's an honor to have you on my show today because you or the black youth are viewed in a negative connotation.
Always.
Right? And you come to eradicate that. You are eradicating that myth that black youth are no good, low lives, and they'll never achieve to anything.
100%.
They should be dead. They have felonies. And you are eradicating that myth. And that's why I definitely appreciate how you articulate yourself and for you being on my show today.
No, and I appreciate you having me. And, you know, for some of the people that may not know, you know, it was a pleasure to have you at my college graduation. And it meant a lot to me to see that, you know, because a lot of the time our elders don't support us for everything. You know, a lot of the time it's like they only acknowledge the negative things that we do, but there's never an acknowledgement to the positivity. And in our community, you know, sadly, people like me aren't accepted. You know, I was luckily enough to where, you know, I kind of was able to juggle and, you know, I could still relate with, you know, the kids from my neighborhood and playing basketball. But I know a lot of intelligent kids that were made fun of, when that should be something that's, you know, respected and celebrated in our community. But instead, it's like, I know a lot of people who feel they need to pretend to be dumb to fit in. You know, they don't wear intelligent like a badge of honor. It's almost like you're ashamed of that when it should be the other way around. So I think it's a lot of backwards things in our community that do need to be corrected. But like I said, I think a dialogue will help. Talking to the elderly, talking to people your own age, and just kind of coming up with a solution, because I do feel like the oppression that we face on a regular basis can only be fixed if we fix our own problems first. Until then, people will always be able to keep us oppressed, and they'll always be able to turn us against each other and use certain social, things to keep us down. But if we have these dialects with each other and we come together, there's nothing scarier than that.
And you know what's amazing, what you just said, because sometimes on Facebook,
Right.
I would see someone post a person that just graduated college.
Right.
And it may be no shares
Right.
and 5 likes.
Right.
And then I'll see someone who just was released from prison.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll see maybe 15 shares and 160 likes.
Right.
So what are they saying?
Yeah.
What are they saying?
Yeah.
They're saying that education is less than negativity, going to prison.
Absolutely.
So you have to go to prison in order to get accolades.
Right.
When education
Should be the thing.
should be the key.
Yeah, I agree.
So I definitely agree with the analogy that you just gave.
It's funny that you say that too, because I see that in so many different, fields. Like, for example, a lot of the time you see fights on Facebook, and a fight will get thousands of shares. It'll go viral. You know what I mean? But then you see stuff like a young kid. Like the other day, I seen something. It was like a 15-year-old kid. He got accepted to like every Ivy League school, and people barely know about that because it wasn't shared. Like you said, it's not being publicized to that extent. And it's like, we feed off of negativity, and that's a big issue because as a culture, it's not like that in other cultures. I've had the pleasure to go to a school in Long Island through basketball where I was around, the elite. I was, in one of the wealthiest towns in America, Brookville, Long Island, and I could see how those people interact in, places that have my own people at, and I got the best of both worlds because I went to school in Brooklyn. I experienced what that was like, going to school by Fort Greene projects, seeing kids bringing guns to school, and then I was able to go to school in Brookville and see what that was like and see how those children were being raised to own businesses, not to work for somebody, to be the head of corporations. And they didn't have to be worried, oh, there's a kid in my class with a gun. So how can I concentrate on school with that? And I think that overall, as a society, there's so many different and social injustices that, like I said, if we don't make a difference, there won't be a difference.
So are you for social justice or for the justice of black people?
I'm for social justice, but I feel like the inequality only happens to black people for the most part in this country.
What about the inequality of Indians? What about the inequality of Mexicans?
I do believe that there's an inequality of Indians and Mexicans, but I still feel like they stick together as a society. That's where the difference is. So I know Indian people that won't buy outside of their neighborhood. They won't spend money anywhere else but in their neighborhood. I know, a whole bunch of different cultures that do deal with inequalities and injustice, but they stick together. Our problem is that we don't stick together in the injustice. We're harder on each other than sometimes the oppressor is. And I think that, yes, I am for, injustice. Like, I'm against injustice for anybody. But I think that for my people specifically, it's a lot worse because we're so hard on each other and on ourselves. And, I know that there's Indian communities where, they don't have to go to the bank for a loan. They keep it in their community. Right. I could go and borrow it from my neighbor and give it back to them eventually when I actually know somebody who's done that. And I don't feel like we have that type of connection in our own community amongst black people.
I asked you that because someone once asked me when the Black Lives Matter was so prevalent at one time. And they said, Malik, are you saying Black Lives Matter and white lives don't matter?
Right.
So I said, of course not.
Right.
So I said, if there was a fire, your house was on fire, right? Your house was on fire.
Right.
And the fire department came on the block. Would you tell them, wait, no, leave my house alone. There's other houses on the block?
Right.
Or would you let them put out the house that's on fire? He said, of course, I would allow them to put the house out on fire. Right. I said, okay. Black people are on fire right now.
100%.
So it's imperative that we put that fire out. We're not saying that no other lives matter,
Right.
but we're saying right now,
Deal with the issue at hand.
this is the issue at hand.
Right.
So we have to understand, and people have to, again, the word understanding is so important.
Mm-hmm.
See, we choose not to understand each other because there's so many people that can't they can't put themselves in someone else's shoes.
Right.
So if you can't put yourself in someone else's shoes, you will never understand their plight.
100%.
So if you never understand their plight, you will always belittle them, look down upon them.
Right.
And whenever you feel someone's less than you, you're going to always treat them less than you.
I agree. And I have a question for you.
Yes.
You know, growing up in your generation where, you know, crack was prevalent, where, you know, New York, the crime rate was a lot higher, you know, that was a time where, you know, you got to kind of see an era where, you know, because you were born in what, 69?
1969.
So that's like the plight of the Black Panthers. That was, you know, Black unity and stuff like that. And then to see it go like this and look like we are, you know, kind of reaching unity, and then it goes down. And, you know, you see crack hit, and a lot of the Panthers are being taken out through that, or they're being arrested. Like, can you speak on what that experience was like for you, seeing both sides of that, you know, seeing this golden era, what you thought, oh, we're really unifying, and then to just see drugs and in that era, that the crack epidemic just wiped everybody out and put us, you know, 10 years back.
See, I really wasn't too familiar with the Black Panther movement growing up.
Right.
Because in my household, it was dysfunctional.
Right.
You see, so I missed a lot of that. If my parents would happen to be on that, then maybe I would be aware of it. But I missed a lot of that because my household was dysfunctional.
Right.
But however, the crack era, because I was in the crack era and I was hustling at the time, destroyed or helped to destroy the Black community even more. It destroyed. I'm talking about it. That wasn't the essence of it, but it was crack definitely enhanced the deterrence of our Black community.
Right.
I would definitely say that, but I don't know. I'm not familiar. Of course, I'm aware of the Black Panther movement now, but as I was growing up, I wasn't unaware because we had too much going on in our household.
So let me ask you that: how did that affect you? You know, the dysfunction in your household. Like what did that do to you as a human being and as an adult? And how did you overcome that, or how did you succumb to it? Or what lessons did you learn in your life that helped you?
Well, it's like, let's say if you're a gang member and you rear your child up to be a gang member, they didn't succumb to it, they was raised up in it.
Right.
You see, in my household, I was raised up in a dysfunctional household, so I didn't succumb to it.
Right.
I was
That's
raised into it.
Right.
You see, so that's all I knew. However, as time passed, I grew up and I entered the prison system.
Right.
You know, I wasn't lucky enough or blessed enough to be one of the 25-year-olds who didn't have a felony, because I was already in prison at that time.
Right.
So however, I began to read and educate myself, and I broke those chains that had me bound, that I grew up in. I broke those chains, and I found out that this wasn't the right thing that I was taught in my household. So I had to educate myself, not re-educate, because I never was educated in the first place. So I had to educate myself and become aware that these particular things that I was taught in my household was incorrect.
Right. Absolutely. And do you believe that the educational part was what was key and what was missing, other than the dysfunction? But like, do you feel like because of the lack of education, you weren't able to rationalize, you weren't able to look at a situation and dissect it and think, and it was just everything was off of actions and emotion rather than, you know, I'm able to sit here and dissect it and think about it?
You were taught, or I was taught, to be vicious. I was taught to be an animal, and we know animals is irrational. Animals are not rational beings, right? So I was taught not to use my rationale. I was taught to be irrational, no matter what the circumstances was. So as I educated myself, and educate, the root word is educare, means to come from within. So we already educated, but sometimes we need, this is why I love teachers, we need teachers to pull that out of us, right? And I didn't have those teachers in my households. Again, in the prison system, I found these particular teachers to pull out that education that lied within.
Right. So you were miseducated.
I was miseducated, absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. Definitely. And I wanted to ask you, do you feel like in our communities we have enough for our youth as far as positive things for them to, basketball teams, recreational centers, just extracurricular activities that they can be involved in so that the streets don't have to feel like the only option?
No, definitely. I definitely don't think we have enough. And I think that it's set up for us not to have enough because we are the product of the prison system. We are the this is our pipeline, the prison system or death. So absolutely. But me personally, I don't even like to call it communities anymore.
Right.
Because, the last 5 letters on community is what? Unity.
Yeah.
Right? And that doesn't exist.
Right.
So when we bring that back, then we could begin to have communities.
How do we bring that back?
We bring that back, as you said, we can dialogue, we converse with each other, and not a whole lot of monologue, because a lot of leaders, so-called black leaders today, they do a whole lot of monologue, right? And I think dialogue is more imperative to have than monologue.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would say that for me, I think it's also leaders that lead by example. A lot of people talk, but they don't live the truth that they're trying to put out there.
Those are not leaders. See, and if you watch Facebook, social media, most people say, yo, boss up. They want to be a boss. See, and the difference between a boss and a leader is simple. A boss tells you what to do. A leader's in the front line showing you what to do.
Absolutely.
See, so it's important that we should try to educate ourselves to want to be leaders opposed to being bosses.
I agree, 100%. And I also think that a lot of the time in our communities, we emphasize things that to me aren't as important as others. For example, like basketball was so stressed to me when I was ranked and when I was playing that education wasn't. So there was a lot of times where I was in situations and predicaments where, the basketball thing was what was prevalent, but education wasn't stressed to me. So I think a lot of the time what we emphasize isn't right. And I think we need to do a better job with that as well.
I agree. When I played for Thomas Jefferson, because I played high school basketball too, all I did was walk the halls. I didn't go to classes. My coach used to come up to me and say, let me know what classes you're not feeling so we could go talk to the teachers. So education was important. The basketball skills was.
Absolutely.
You see, why? Because coaches nowadays, if you're a good basketball player, they get recognition. But if you're good educated, they don't get no recognition. They the coach. They the basketball coach.
100%.
I definitely want to, I appreciate you being on the show. I thank you 100%, man. You was articulate. You are different. You are you beyond the myth, and I'm glad that you just eradicated the myth of the young black male. And I just, please keep up the great work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
And those who are watching, who may be going down the wrong path, you should use this individual as an example that you don't have to be a felon at the age of 25, that you don't have to be a drug dealer, that you don't have to commit crimes at the age of 25, and that you can always be successful. I appreciate y'all. Thanks a lot for watching. Just a Jewel with Arthur Malik.
Just a Jewel with our host, Arthur Malik.